Oh my God, it's real. There's so much of it. This changes everything. I can't believe it. It's real. Gold, a whole treasure. I have to get this out of here.
She gave him a decade of devotion and her life savings. He gave her 30 days to vacate their mansion. Left with exactly $24 and a trash bag of clothes, Brooke thought her life was over. Oignis. Oi. But a dead aunt's crumbling farmhouse held a secret that would eventually make her billionaire ex-husband weak. To the outside world, Brooke and Damian Whitaker were a picture of Atlanta high society. Damian was a ruthlessly ambitious corporate litigator who had just made senior partner at a prestigious Buckhead law firm. Brooke was the dutiful, elegant wife who hosted charity galas, kept their pristine six-bedroom estate running like a Swiss watch, and smiled for the cameras. But behind the mahogany doors of their custom-built mansion, the reality was starkly different. Brooke had met Damian back at university. Back then, he was a broke law student drowning in debt, and she was a pragmatic accounting major. Brooke had sacrificed everything for his dream. She dropped out in her senior year, took up 3 grueling jobs, waitressing at a diner until the early hours, bookkeeping for a local mechanic, and tutoring just to pay his tuition and keep a roof over their heads. When he finally passed the bar, he handed her a standard, legally dense prenuptial agreement. "It is just a formality, babe," he had said, flashing that devastatingly charming smile. "My new firm requires it for all partners to protect corporate assets. We are in this together, forever." Brooke, blindly in love and exhausted from years of carrying their financial burden, signed it without consulting her own lawyer. It was the single most catastrophic mistake of her life. The betrayal did not come with a screaming match or shattered glass. It came on a rainy evening over a plate of cold salmon. Damian sat at the opposite end of their 12-foot dining table, swirling a glass of Macallan, and calmly stated, "I am filing for divorce, Brooke. I have outgrown this marriage, and frankly, I have outgrown you." Before Brooke could even process the shock, the doorbell rang. It was Damian's personal assistant, holding a pristine manila envelope containing the divorce papers and an eviction notice. But the true twist of the knife came the next morning. As Brooke was frantically throwing her clothes into garbage bags, Damian having locked her out of the joint accounts overnight, the front door opened. In walked Sophia Blake. Sophia was a junior paralegal at Damian's firm and already carrying a designer overnight bag. She did not even look at Brooke as she breezed past her into the master bedroom, casually instructing the movers to toss Brooke's remaining shoes into the driveway. "The prenup is ironclad," Damian told Brooke as she stood trembling on the porch clutching the keys to her 10-year-old Honda Civic. "You waive any right to alimony, the house, and the investments. I am leaving you the car. Consider it a parting gift. You have until noon to get off my property before I call the police for trespassing." By noon, Brooke was homeless. For the following period, Brooke lived in the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart on the outskirts of Atlanta. She slept with a tire iron under her passenger seat, showering at a cheap local gym using the last of the loose change she had scrounged from her cup holders. The sheer indignity of her situation was suffocating. She had built Damian's empire from the ground up, brick by agonizing brick, only to be discarded like a piece of broken furniture. She applied for dozens of jobs, but an incomplete college degree and a lengthy gap in her resume left her practically invisible to employers. The breaking point arrived on a freezing morning. The car battery died. As she sat in the freezing cabin, wrapped in 3 sweaters and sobbing uncontrollably, her prepaid burner phone rang. "Am I speaking with Brooke Caldwell?" an older, gravely voice asked. Brooke wiped her nose, her teeth chattering. "Yes." "Who is this?" "My name is Warren Hayes. I am an estate attorney based in Asheville, North Carolina. I have been trying to track you down for some time. It concerns your great-aunt Vivian Hargrove." Brooke frowned. Great-aunt Vivian was a reclusive, eccentric woman she had not seen since she was a child. Vivian lived like a hermit in the Blue Ridge Mountains and was notoriously paranoid, refusing to trust banks, the government, or even her own family. "I am sorry, Mr. Hayes, but I have no money," Brooke said, her voice hollow. "If she left debts, I cannot pay them. I am living in my car." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Caldwell, Vivian did not leave you debts. She passed away, and as her only living blood relative, she left you her entire estate. It is a property located in a remote part of the county. The deed is fully in your name. If you can get here, you have a home." Brooke dropped the phone. It was not a mansion. It was not a sprawling estate, but it was 4 walls and a roof. It was survival. With the help of a sympathetic tow truck driver who jump-started her Civic out of pity, Brooke scraped together exactly enough gas money to make the drive across state lines to North Carolina. She left Atlanta in her rearview mirror, swearing to herself that she would never be a victim to Damian Whitaker or anyone else ever again. The drive up the winding, treacherous roads of the Blue Ridge Mountains tested the limits of Brooke's dying Honda. By the time she pulled onto the dirt path marked Oak Haven Road, the sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the dense pine forest. Attorney Hayes had met her in town just long enough to hand over a heavy iron key and a manila folder, his expression tight with unspoken pity. "The property has been neglected, Brooke. Vivian was not well in her final years. Just temper your expectations," he had warned. He had not exaggerated. When Brooke finally parked in front of the address, her heart plummeted into her stomach. This was not a rustic mountain retreat. It was a rotting monument to decay. The farmhouse was a 2-story wooden structure that looked like it was slowly sinking into the earth. The porch roof sagged dangerously. The paint had long since peeled away to reveal gray splintered wood, and ivy crawled up the sides like skeletal fingers. The front yard was a graveyard of rusted farm equipment and waist-high weeds. Tears pricked her eyes. This was her grand inheritance, a haunted-looking shack in the middle of nowhere. It felt like the universe was playing a cruel, extended joke on her. Taking a deep breath, Brooke forced herself out of the car. She inserted the heavy iron key into the rusted lock. It turned with a screech that echoed through the quiet woods. She pushed the door open, immediately coughing as the smell of dust, mildew, and stale air hit her. The interior was straight out of a Depression-era nightmare. Yellowed newspapers were stacked waist-high in the corners. The furniture was draped in moth-eaten sheets. There was no running water, and when she flicked the light switch, nothing happened. The power had been shut off months ago. Brooke sank to the dusty wooden floor of the living room and finally let herself scream. She screamed until her throat was raw, cursing Damian, cursing his new girlfriend Sophia, cursing her own naivete, and cursing great Aunt Vivian for leaving her a burden instead of a lifeline. But as the night grew cold, survival instincts kicked in. She had $20 to her name. She had nowhere else to go. She dragged her sleeping bag inside, barricaded the front door with a heavy oak chair, and slept on the floor. The following period was a grueling test of human endurance. Brooke became a woman possessed. She traded her designer clothes at a local consignment shop in town for thick work boots, heavy flannel shirts, cleaning supplies, and basic groceries. She spent long hours hauling trash out to a burn pile in the yard, scrubbing decades of grime from the walls, and fighting off a family of raccoons that had claimed the upstairs bathroom. She fetched water from a nearby creek to boil on a small camp stove she bought at a thrift store. Her hands, once soft and perfectly manicured for Atlanta society events, became blistered, calloused, and cracked. Yet strangely, the physical labor was therapeutic. Every sweep of the broom, every bag of trash hauled away, felt like she was scrubbing Damian's toxic influence from her soul. Then, he called. Brooke was on her knees scrubbing the kitchen floor when her burner phone buzzed. The call ID made her blood run cold. She answered it, refusing to let him hear her voice shake. "Hello, Damian." "Brooke!" Finally, Damian's arrogant voice drifted through the speaker, accompanied by the background noise of clinking glasses and jazz music. "My accountant found a small discrepancy. Apparently, there was a joint savings account from years ago with about $400 in it. I need you to sign a release form so I can close it. I will email it to you." Brooke stared at her blistered, bleeding hands. He was a millionaire living in the house she decorated, sleeping with a woman a decade younger, and he was hunting her down for $400. "I am a little busy right now, Damian," she said coldly. Damian chuckled, a mean, dismissive sound. "Right, the estate. My private investigator told me about your little inheritance. A dilapidated shack in the Carolina backwoods. Honestly, Brooke, it suits you. You always were a bit low rent. Just sign the paperwork. Do not make me drag you to court. You cannot afford the gas to get there." He hung up. Brooke sat in the silence of the empty, cold kitchen, shaking with a rage so profound it blinded her. She threw the phone across the room, watching it shatter against the wall. A fierce, violent storm rolled over the mountains that night. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls, and the temperature dropped below freezing. Brooke huddled in her sleeping bag in the kitchen, the warmest room in the house. But a severe draft was blowing up through the floorboards of the adjacent pantry, turning the space into an icebox. Shivering violently, Brooke grabbed a flashlight and her only tool, a rusted crowbar she had found in the barn. She marched into the pantry, determined to nail a piece of scrap wood over whatever hole was letting the winter air in. She knelt on the faded, peeling linoleum. The draft was coming from the far corner, where the floor felt slightly uneven. She jammed the edge of the crowbar under the cracked linoleum and ripped a large piece away. Beneath, it was not a hole. It was a solid oak floorboard. But unlike the rest of the house, the wood here was thick, unrotted, and strangely deliberate. Brooke noticed a deep groove cut into the wood. She jammed the crowbar into the seam and pushed with all her might. The wood groaned, then snapped upwards. Brooke froze. Hidden beneath the false floorboard was a heavy, blackened iron ring set into a square trapdoor that had been completely sealed over with tar and linoleum. Her heart began to pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. Great Aunt Vivian had been paranoid. She did not trust banks. She lived in poverty, yet she owned acres of prime mountain real estate outright. Brooke gripped the iron ring with both hands. She braced her boots against the floor and pulled. The trap door did not budge. It was sealed tight by decades of rust and gravity. Gritting her teeth, Brooke grabbed the crowbar again, wedging it into the seam of the trap door, using it as a lever. She threw her entire body weight onto the steel bar. With a deafening crack that echoed over the thunder outside, the seal broke. A rush of cold, incredibly stale air hit Brooke's face. She grabbed her flashlight, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold it steady. She aimed the beam down into the pitch-black square hole. It was not just a crawl space. It was a descending set of stone steps leading deep into the earth beneath the farmhouse. And sitting at the bottom of those stairs, reflecting the beam of her flashlight, was a row of heavy military-grade, olive-drab metal footlockers sealed with heavy brass padlocks. Brooke Caldwell, the woman kicked out with nothing, had just found Great Aunt Vivian's vault. Brooke stood at the top of the subterranean staircase, her breath visible in the freezing air rushing up from the darkness. The flashlight beam trembled in her grip, illuminating the heavy military-grade footlockers at the bottom. For a wild, irrational moment, she thought about putting the floorboard back and pretending she had seen nothing. But the memory of Damien's cruel laughter on the phone echoed in her mind. Gripping the rusted crowbar like a weapon, Brooke descended the stone steps. The air in the hidden cellar was thick, smelling of dried earth, canvas, and old machine oil. There were 5 footlockers in total, pushed flush against a wall of reinforced concrete that Vivian must have paid a fortune to have poured in secret. Brooke knelt in the dust before the first trunk. It was sealed with a heavy brass padlock that had turned green with oxidation. She wedged the sharp end of the crowbar into the U-shaped shackle of the lock, braced her boot against the metal trunk, and threw her weight backward. The rusted internal pins gave way with a sharp snap. Brooke tossed the broken lock aside and lifted the heavy lid. Her flashlight beam hit the contents, and the light reflected back in a blinding, warm metallic hue. Brooke gasped, dropping the flashlight. It clattered against the stone floor, rolling to illuminate the trunk from a harsh angle. The footlocker was filled to the brim with gold. These were not modern, polished bullion bars from a bank. They were varied, historical, and dense. Canvas bags stamped with United States Mint sat alongside stacks of heavy rectangular ingots. Brooke reached out with a trembling, blistered hand and untied one of the canvas bags. It was filled with pristine, uncirculated gold coins, double eagles, their dates reading earlier eras. She scrambled to the second trunk, smashing the lock with 3 frantic swings of the crowbar. Inside were perfectly sealed architectural tubes and thick leather-bound folios. Brooke pulled one of the folios out, opening it on her lap. They were bearer bonds and original stock certificates dating back to earlier decades, shares in early aerospace companies, regional railroads that had since been absorbed into national conglomerates, and telecom giants, all issued directly to Vivian Hargrove and never cashed. By the time she forced open the 5th and final trunk, Brooke was sobbing, not tears of despair, but tears of pure, overwhelming shock. The final chest contained velvet-lined trays of rare, flawless Morgan silver dollars, and at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of deeds to commercial land in downtown Charlotte. And Vivian was not just a paranoid hermit. She was the final silent heir to a massive Appalachian timber fortune. She had liquidated the family assets decades ago, terrified of government overreach and banking collapses, and buried her wealth in the only place she trusted, the earth beneath her feet. Brooke sat in the freezing basement until the sun came up, surrounded by wealth she could not even begin to comprehend. She did not have a phone, she did not have electricity, but she had power. At dawn, she carefully lowered the lids, walked upstairs, and drove her sputtering Honda Civic into town. She waited outside the local library until it opened, used their public computer to find the number for Warren Hayes, and borrowed the librarian's desk phone to call him. "Warren," Brooke said, her voice eerily calm, "I need you to come to the farmhouse today, and you need to bring the most discreet, trustworthy appraiser you know, someone who specializes in historical bullion and equities." Warren arrived hours later in a mud-splattered Subaru, accompanied by a nervous-looking, bespectacled man introduced as Thomas Gable, an independent estate appraiser and numismatist. When Brooke led them into the pantry, pulled up the floorboard, and escorted them down into the vault, both men were stunned into absolute silence. Thomas Gable fell to his knees in front of the gold coins, adjusting his thick glasses, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold his loupe. "Mother of God," Gable whispered, examining a single gold double eagle. "These have not seen the light of day in decades. The premium on these alone." It took Thomas and Warren grueling days to catalog the contents of the 5 trunks. They worked in absolute secrecy, bringing a portable generator to light the basement. Brooke sat in the corner with a loaded shotgun she had found in the barn, trusting no one, watching every move they made. On the evening of the 3rd day, Warren and Thomas sat with Brooke at her battered kitchen table. The camp stove was boiling water for instant coffee. Warren slid a piece of paper across the table. "Brooke," Warren said, his voice grave, "the bearer bonds will require a team of specialized corporate attorneys to negotiate the back dividends, and the real estate deeds need to be updated. But Thomas has calculated the spot value of the bullion and the auction value of the numismatic collection." Brooke looked at the piece of paper. The number written in blue ink was $48,500. "With the equities and the commercial land," Warren continued, clearing his throat, "you are looking at a net worth of roughly $60 to $70 million. Brooke stared at the paper. $60 million. She thought of Damien sitting in the Buckhead mansion she had cleaned for years, drinking his expensive scotch, laughing about the $400 he was trying to squeeze out of her. She thought of Sophia Blake casually tossing Brooke's shoes into the driveway. "Warren," Brooke said, her voice as hard and cold as the mountain bedrock beneath them, "I need to set up a blind trust. I want Oak Haven Holdings officially incorporated in Delaware by Monday. And I need a referral for a corporate attack dog attorney in Atlanta. Someone ruthless, someone who specializes in hostile financial takeovers and debt acquisition." Warren raised an eyebrow, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his weathered face. "I know just the woman. Her name is Meredith Kane." "What are you planning, Brooke?" Brooke folded the piece of paper and slipped it into her flannel shirt pocket. "I am going to buy my life back, and then I am going to collect a debt." "Ice, easy." It took a period for Brooke to undergo her metamorphosis. She did not buy a flashy sports car or a penthouse. She stayed in the farmhouse, but she hired a crew of discreet local contractors to entirely gut and restore the property, transforming the rotting shack into a stunning fortress-like modern estate hidden deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. She paid cash. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Meredith Kane was earning every cent of her exorbitant retainer. Meredith was a brilliant predatory corporate lawyer who took immense pleasure in dismantling arrogant men. Operating entirely behind the anonymous shield of Oak Haven Holdings, Meredith began a forensic dive into Damien Whitaker's finances. What she found was a house of cards. Damien was a brilliant litigator, but a terrible financial manager. Intoxicated by his new status as a senior partner and desperate to impress his young girlfriend, Sophia, Damien had begun hemorrhaging money. He had taken out massive lines of credit to fund a lavish lifestyle, chartering private jets, buying Sophia a Ferrari, and purchasing a share in a luxury commercial high-rise development in downtown Atlanta. called the Apex Project. To fund his stake in the Apex Project, Damien had leveraged his own home, the mansion he had kicked Brooke out of, and signed a predatory mezzanine loan with a private equity firm. The terms were brutal. If the development hit any delays and he missed a single quarterly payment, the lender had the right to call the entire loan due immediately and seize his assets. He is over-leveraged to the tune of $8 million, Meredith told Brooke over a secure video call. Brooke was sitting in her newly finished mahogany-paneled home office in the farmhouse, sipping tea. The Apex project has been stalled for months due to supply chain issues. Damien is drowning. He is liquidating his stock portfolio just to make the interest payments. Who holds the mezzanine loan? Brooke asked, her eyes sharp. A boutique firm called Sterling Vanguard, Meredith replied. Buy the debt, Brooke commanded softly. Offer them a 20% premium to sell Damien's loan to Oak Haven Holdings. Make sure the transfer is ironclad. Weeks later, Oak Haven Holdings owned Damien Whitaker's financial soul. The trap snapped shut on a rainy Tuesday, exactly 1 year to the day that Damien had handed Brooke her eviction notice. Damien was sitting in his corner office in Buckhead, massaging his temples. His firm was threatening to review his partnership status due to his erratic behavior, and Sophia had been complaining for weeks about his suddenly tight budget. His assistant buzzed in. "Mr. Whitaker, there is a courier here. He says he needs your signature on an urgent financial disclosure from your Apex lenders." Damien groaned and signed for the heavy envelope. He ripped it open, expecting another delay notice. Instead, he read a notice of default. The debt had been sold to a new holding company, and due to a missed deadline on the construction milestones, Oak Haven Holdings was calling the loan. All $8 million were due in 48 hours, or they would begin immediate foreclosure on his mansion, his equity, and his firm partnership share. Damien panicked. He spent the next 48 hours frantically calling banks, begging his law partners for a bailout, and trying to reach the mysterious CEO of Oak Haven Holdings. His partners, disgusted by his reckless financial exposure, turned their backs on him. The banks laughed at him. On Thursday morning, with 0 hours left on the clock, Damien's phone rang. It was Meredith Kane. "Mr. Whitaker," Meredith said smoothly. "My client, the CEO of Oak Haven Holdings, has agreed to a brief in-person meeting to discuss the terms of your surrender of assets. We are in conference room A at my downtown offices." Damien arrived looking like a ghost. His bespoke suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling. He walked into the sleek, glass-walled conference room, desperate to plead his case, ready to beg this anonymous billionaire for a 60-day extension. Meredith Kane was sitting at the massive granite table, and sitting beside her, wearing a stunning, tailored charcoal blazer, her hair flawlessly styled, radiating an aura of absolute untouchable power, was Brooke. Damien froze in the doorway, the color entirely drained from his face. "Brooke, what? What are you doing here?" Brooke did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply looked at him with the cold detachment one might reserve for a dead insect on a windshield. "Sit down, Damien," she said. Her voice was smooth, commanding, and terrifyingly calm. Damien collapsed into a leather chair across from her, his mind misfiring as he tried to connect the homeless woman he had thrown onto the street with the polished titan sitting before him. You are Oak Haven," he whispered, his voice cracking. "But how? You had nothing. You had that worthless shack in the woods." That worthless shack had $60 million buried under the floorboards, Brooke stated matter-of-factly. "Turns out my aunt was a much better saver than you are." Damien's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. He looked from Brooke to Meredith, the reality of his doom settling over him like a suffocating shroud. "Brooke, please," Damien begged, his arrogance completely shattered. Tears welled in his eyes. "You know me. We built a life together. You cannot do this. If you call this loan, I lose the house. I lose my partnership. I will be bankrupt. I will have nothing." Brooke leaned forward, resting her elbows on the granite table. She looked directly into the eyes of the man she had loved, the man she had scrubbed floors for, the man who had discarded her like trash. "I remember," Brooke said softly. "I remember exactly what that feels like. I remember the rain. I remember the 30 days notice. I remember you locking the bank accounts while I was packing my clothes in garbage bags." She slid a thick stack of legal documents across the table. It was the foreclosure paperwork. "The prenup you forced me to sign was ironclad, Damien." Brooke continued, echoing the exact words he had used earlier. And so is this debt. You waive any right to arbitration, extensions, or grace periods. I am taking the house. I am taking your equity. I am leaving you your car. Consider it a parting gift. Damien buried his face in his hands and began to openly weep. Brooke stood up, buttoning her blazer. She did not feel the need to scream. She did not feel the need to hurl insults. The victory was absolute, and his tears were the only signature she required. You have until noon on Monday to get off my property, Damien, Brooke said, turning toward the door, before I call the police for trespassing. By the end of the month, the Buckhead Mansion was sold by Oak Haven Holdings, and the profits were quietly donated to a women's shelter in Atlanta. Sophia Blake left Damien the moment the credit cards started bouncing, packing her designer overnight bag and moving in with a younger crypto broker. Damien Whitaker, once the king of Atlanta high society, was forced to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy and moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, driving a 10-year-old leased sedan. Brooke Caldwell returned to the Blue Ridge Mountains. She sat on the sprawling, wraparound porch of her beautifully restored farmhouse, drinking a cup of coffee as she watched the sun rise over the pine forest. She had started with $24 and a broken heart, and she had built an empire. She breathed in the crisp mountain air, finally, entirely, and blissfully free. What a journey. Brooke's story is the ultimate proof that karma never loses an address. And sometimes your lowest point is just the foundation for your greatest comeback. If you love this story of ultimate revenge and rising from the ashes, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life dramas.